Thanks everybody for sticking around at lunch hour. I know it's loud, so we're all going to try to talk to the microphones. We have a great panel, and I'm sure walking around the show, you've seen just how much of the conversation is about this $10 trillion a year mobility market worldwide. It's not just the sales of cars anymore, but it's every aspect of personal mobility and transportation. These five guys are going to tell us a lot about some of the opportunities downstream for our ever-connected cars. So first, we're going to hear a brief openings from our five panelists.
Hi, I'm Z Hussain. I'm the CTO and founder of Aeris Communications. We've been involved in the M2M and IoT space for more than 20 years, providing applications and services and connectivity platform for people who need to deploy applications where they need to gather data from remote devices and transmit control information back to the device that's out in the field. Obviously, a large number of the units that are running on our network are automobiles, and we've been providing services to these automobiles in that time frame. So very quickly, the future is obviously changing, evolving quite a bit. You see the whole autonomous car drive and push that has been accelerating in the past few years based on a number of big players who are coming into the market. And then there is, of course, a lot of information related to beyond the automobiles, perhaps the fleet management aspect of it that is given less attention by the media at this point, but is equally important and perhaps has more impact on the highways and byways rather than the cities and infrastructure inside the major cities, if you will.
And Brian is up next.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me, is this about how loud I should be? I know it's kind of loud in here. Yeah. All right, I'm Brian Trussell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Glympse. We're a location sharing platform. So what we do is we enable any device, any kind of Internet of Moving Things device, whether it be a phone or a watch or a car, to be able to share your real-time location with somebody else. So on your phone, that might be you're going to meet somebody for lunch, you're heading home from work, to coordinate that ETA, that arrival time, and then that now feeds into cars. So we've got quite a few auto manufacturer relationships where with most of the auto manufacturers with the Glympse integrated into them. When you think about when you're in a car, you're usually going to pick somebody up, you're going to meet somebody, somebody's waiting for you on the other end. And so we facilitate that. And then our platform also will help facilitate some of these new business models that'll come up as we go into this Internet of Things, connected car, on-demand economy, e-commerce coming into the car. And so we play a platform layer on that. We also are involved with enterprises who want to share the location with customers. So we have nationwide rollouts with both Comcast and with Time Warner Cable. So when the people are now coming to make a service call to your house, you can see where they are in real time, kind of like an Uber-like experience for that. Same thing for with Pizza Hut on pizza delivery. So location platform across various devices, with the auto being an important element for us.
Stefan? Oh,
Kurt.
Sorry,
that's right.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Beekler with Streetline. Depending on the driver, cars are parked between 85 and 95% of their lives. So if you have a connected car or smart transportation, doesn't matter. You got to find a place to put the cars. But that space has never been inventoried or monitored or optimized. So Streetline focuses on smart parking. What does that mean? That means occupancy, primarily. We're not payment, we're not reservations, things like that. We're all about what is the balance between supply and demand. So we capture the locations of this parking, capture all the data, the policy, things like that, but we also capture occupancy. We do that in two ways. One, with technologies that we've developed, cameras, sensors, and an SDK in phones, and all three, a hockey puck, a camera, or a smartphone can tell us where spaces are occupied or vacant. We also have developed this big old catcher's mitt that can absorb everything else. So payment data, license plate recognition data, Wi-Fi sniffing, GPS probe data, et cetera, et cetera. We bring all that data together, now we have accurate occupancy, and in that process, we've lowered our cost of determining occupancy by about 90% in the last 2 years. So it's really cool. Then we can push that data out to apps, we can push it out to websites, we can push it out to analytics. Bottom line, we help the cities manage that occupancy, that will lower their congestion, we increase their revenue, but we also make parking spaces more available to consumers. So turns out, you even pollute less when your car's off. So it's all about better utilization for the merchant, for the city and for the consumer, the motorist.
Sorry, Stefan?
Right, my name is Stefan Gudmundsson, work for u-blox. We are a technology company. We provide the very building blocks for the connected and autonomous car. So lane level accurate positioning, short range technologies, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, V2X, and LTE and WAN solutions that are actually enabling all of these different functionalities.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Bartolomeo. I'm with Verizon, and I'm responsible for Verizon's IoT solutions. And if you take a look at our industry, really over the past 10 years, what we see is that all the carriers have invested heavily, as the application service providers have, to connect millions of vehicles, fleets, a number of municipal devices, municipal transit. And so we're connecting more and more things onto the network. But I think the real opportunity is how do we build this out so that it is a seamless, highly integrated mobility as a service that really anticipates people's needs. And we move away from looking at individual transportation choices and look at the end-to-end mobility experience. I think that's where we'll see improvements, and that's where we're seeing investments today at places like Deutsche Bahn, where they're integrating their rail and municipal transit with shared vehicles and other municipal transportation opportunities.
Saeed, let me start with you. You talked about fleet management. I don't know if everybody realizes what a huge sector of the economy trucking is. Last year, the U.S. spent about $700 billion to ship 10.8 billion tons of freight in trucks. Saeed, what are the challenges to a semi or fully autonomous fleet management of larger vehicles? We've seen some pilot projects like by Daimler and others in the works. And on the back end, what else is going to be necessary to make beyond just the vehicles move, but moving and making sure that freight gets to where it needs to be in the right sequence?
Sure. One of the interesting differences, I guess, between fleets and the automotive industry is that the fleets are remarkably more regulated by the federal government than you would expect. There are laws and regulations that the fleet operators and the vehicle owners must, and the truck owners must conform to that you don't normally expect to see from a normal automotive owner, an individual who's got a car, etc. And that creates a need for certain kinds of communications that you wouldn't normally expect. There's a lot more driver management software being deployed today. There's a lot more automation being done in ways that you wouldn't normally expect. I'll give you a trivial little example. Some years ago, the NHTSA, the highway guys up in the federal government, decided and determined that the large majority of highway fatalities that occurred was because of underinflated tires on trucks. Naturally, they came up with a regulation that says you shall measure every tire every morning before you start out. Well, that's a big problem with driver efficiency and timing efficiency, because it can take you time to measure the tire pressure on 18 wheels, log it, and have that information available. So automated tire pressure systems came on board. The logging back to a central facility, a server, became available. Necessary evolution took place in very, very mundane ways because the regulations that drive that industry are quite different. The other thing that is becoming much more common in the past few years, and the folks who are working on this software can tell you more about it than I can, is the intermodal issues associated with taking goods off of a ship, putting it onto a train, putting it onto a truck, and tracking the delivery of every item that's possibly in a large container to its destination and provide that information accurately. As a consumer, we all depend on delivery of information. You buy something from Amazon and you can go click and find out where it is in the delivery process. That is equally important in the trucking industry on a more grand scale, if you will. Where is the entire load from the ship being delivered? Where is it being split off into different trucks, etc., for delivery to the various organizations that need that stuff? So very different growth path there.
I would add one thing. At Streetline, we're seeing a precipitous increase in the number of RFPs by Texas, Florida, a bunch of other states throughout Europe about telling those drivers that need to rest. Where can they get hot food? Where can they get a shower? But also, where can they find parking? They don't want to go into a lot, take that big rig off the road, take it through a parking lot saying there's no place to leave my truck. So I'm actually kind of stunned at the number of RFPs out there saying, hey, I want to bring parking occupancy to the app that is sent out to the truckers. But the regulations require that these guys got to get off the road. How do you get them off the road? You got to get their truck off the road.
Brian, what do we need as an industry to ensure that the location sharing services are adequate for fully autonomous vehicles? I mean, where are the places they need to be improved? And then secondly, you mentioned Pizza Hut and Comcast and others. I mean, it's nice to be able to look at your phone and see how far away they are in real time. How much of a consumer value is that? Do consumers really like that? Are there other places you see location sharing, outside of the car in the near term?
Yeah, good question. So what we've seen as a company and then as the industry is things are moving on location sharing specifically from a consumer type experience, and now it's bleeding into enterprise and new business models. That's what we've done as a company, and that's what we're seeing happen. So where we as a company, we had our standalone consumer app, share your location with others as on a social level. What you've seen now, and maybe so too broad of a term, but the Uberization of consumer experiences. And Uber came along and said, hey, you know what? This very historic, and Lyft, I should say, those guys are right next door. Lyft came along and said, hey, what's historically been a very frustrating, I'll call for a taxi, I'll wait for it to show up, now turns into an on-demand consumer, real-time expectations of what's going on. And that's becoming the bar for what people expect. Instant, digital, on my phone, transparent. And so now you're seeing that bleed in way beyond what's happening in just automotive pickup scenarios to deliveries. We're talking about an Amazon and a UPS where they used to say, hey, your package will be there sometime next week. Well, now it'll be there tomorrow. Now it'll be there tomorrow between 5 and 2. If you're in one of the pilot cities for Amazon, it'll be at your house within the next 2 hours. And what we do at Glympse is we deal with that last mile or two. We try to we Uberize that experience so you know exactly what's going to show up. So for the cable companies, it means less missed calls because people make sure that they're home at the time, right? It means that they put the dogs away before the pizza guy shows up. So there's an efficiency that gets created, there's a transparency with the customer that gets created because of this location sharing piece. Now, I think it's going to expand from just the consumer, then to enterprises a la a Lyft, a Cable, a Pizza Hut saying, hey, consumer, here's where I am with this experience, to the car being more of a destination delivery, a car being where some of that e-commerce is initiated. Let's just take the pizza example. I may want pizza delivered to my car. I may want to order that pizza on the way home from my car. I may want to actually flip this and say, hey, I'll tell Pizza Hut where I'm at, have that pizza ready for me when I show up by sharing my location there. So or if I've reserved a table through Open Table, let's let the restaurant know when I'm going to show up. So when they see I'm not there and it's 5 minutes after my appointment, well, they can say, oh, I can see he's going to be there in 11 minutes. I'll keep the table, I'll cycle another one out. So there's a lot of efficiencies, there's a lot of benefit to the consumers, to the enterprise to be built out, and it's all geared around this real-time location sharing. The key to and I maybe should have mentioned, in our platform is it's all temporary and ad hoc. So it's, yes, I as a consumer agree to share my location with X for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes while I'm on my way, and vice versa. And I think that's going to open up a lot of really exciting opportunities.
Stefan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, and it's not only that. When you're in the car, you also have other types of multimodal on that side, where, for instance, my fridge can tell me that I need more groceries. When I come home, can order them. And when I go to my car, the car will tell me you have to go to grocery store B and pick these up. And by the way, I lowered the temperature in the trunk because you're bringing home frozen goods. So there are other types of things you can do once you have that connectivity as well from the sharing of location.
Mark, what do we need to do to bring all this functionality together across networks to really have a fully integrated system? I mean, some of the folks I've talked to over the last couple of days envision a world where you get in your car, you're 15 feet away from your house makes sure that you locked all the doors, you didn't leave the oven on, it turns your air conditioning down and makes sure your garage door is closed. But what do we need to do to make sure that this system works across different carriers and networks?
So I think the industry right now is beginning to shift away from technology and focus more on the customer experience. And the reason for that is what you've seen is that we've connected or allowed for connectivity in the vehicles. We've allowed for connectivity in municipal infrastructure. we've made most all of these devices location aware, which is a very important part of how this would all come together. And by looking at the customer experience and thinking about transportation, what you realize is that all of us just want to get from point A to point B as safely, as efficiently, as effectively as possible. And if we look at that, it is possible because all the different modes of transportation are connected onto the network. It's just that none of that information has been brought together on a common platform, and that information is not yet been made contextual. So once we get and we start driving this information to be contextual, and it understands what your calendars and schedules are, then it can recommend types of transportation from your home to the train station, from the train station, to the city, from the train depot, whether it's a taxi cab or another form of transportation, to your office. So now that I believe the network carriers have brought together reliable connectivity for the most part, and that we see some really good data analytics and location awareness being integrated into the information, we're close to starting to bring that together. And some cities are testing it. Some university campuses are beginning to test a little bit. So more in closed loop environments where they can control how the different transportation modes are interacting with the rest of the environment.
Kurt, how much waste do you think there is in the parking industry today? I mean, with a more fully connected parking system, how many fewer spots do you think the U.S. would need? I mean, do you envision with the advent of fully connected and fully autonomous cars, a complete rethinking of even how we park and site parking lots today?
Well, some examples. Today, in the United States, there are 8 parking spaces for every car. So we've overcome this need of not knowing where parking is by just overbuilding at the macro level. The micro level, in one of our cities, they're redoing a pier, and they're going from, the study showed that if they go from 850 spots, but add intelligence, they can go down to 550 spots when they rebuild this. So they're reclaiming, a good 35-40% of that land for another purpose. And that's going to continue because the land is just too valuable. If we think about the lanes on California Avenue, California Street in San Francisco, half the street is really 2 lanes of parking and half the street's 2 lanes of driving. How much is that valuable? How valuable is that real estate in California, in downtown San Francisco? So there's a tremendous amount of waste there. We also we don't know where parking is, so we search for it. If you look at the parking operators, they're a tremendously wasteful layer between the real estate owner and the buyer that actually can be replaced with technology. So there's waste through and through because parking is really laid nascent in a world where hotels and airlines and real estate have all been optimized about where is it, how much is it worth, what's the real-time demand, that sort of thing. All of a sudden you have parking that says, I don't know where it is, I don't know what it's worth, I don't know if it's available. So that by definition leads to an amazing amount of waste.
Stefan, there have been several pilot projects on V2X, vehicle infrastructure, sensors. Obviously, there's a lot of work on V2V. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is expected to announce in the coming weeks a proposal to require all cars, all future cars, to be connected to other cars. Do you see V2X, V2V, both moving ahead in the same trajectory, or do you see fully autonomous vehicles, in essence, obviating the need to address both the V2X and V2V?
I think we're going to see a lot of V2X first, because we're simply not ready for self-driving cars. Even if we know the location down to 10 centimeters, it's not foolproof. And there are still situations where you can't know that. So there's a lot of other sensors and fusions and things that needs to happen. We know what happened with the Tesla, it's going to happen more. So we're no safer in the car like that than we are driving at this moment, but it's convenient. But there's a lot of different things that you can do with the V2X that are enabling certain functions and other types of communications, so collision avoidance, those kinds of things. But it's about critical mass. So even if we say tomorrow all new cars gotta have V2X, well, you have the vast majority of 300 million cars that does not have it, and it's going to take 10 years before they have it. So what are the chances that your next car you're about to run into have this technology for the next 5 years? It's very slim. So it's going to be a very slow rollout initially, and I think we're a little bit further away from that critical mass than we would like. But we have to start somewhere, and that's.
Saeed,
Yeah, I was just going to add that I agree with Stefan. And one of the comments I was going to add is I think the transition period from when no cars have it to when every car has it is a period of safety and danger, potential for safety and danger issues. Because if there is an assumption on the part of a driver who has communication between the vehicle and the infrastructure, things will change for him or her when they're driving up to a light, and somebody who's going the other way doesn't have it, you're going to have a potential for a disaster. I think the Tesla incident is a little bit of a microscopic version of that, where there's an assumption that he can drive autonomously everywhere and therefore it's okay to do so. And if the communication between vehicles doesn't cause the infrastructure to change in the timely way, you're going to see some more of those kinds of potentials happening. And also one thing I would add is that some of the technologies associated with communication between vehicles is starting to happen in the trucking industry. There are pilots already, and I'm sure there'll be deployments soon enough, where you're seeing platooning, where there's efficiency gains in gasoline usage because 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe even larger numbers of trucks can run in a fleet and basically avoid the airflow issues that cause you have higher usage of gasoline.
I think we're also going to see lower demand for driving, right? Because cars are going to take that 20 to 30 year transition where people keep their cars and keep their cars. Let's face it, we're cheap, right? Most humans. But the other services, the alternatives to automobiles were this bastion, this silo of integrated travel. I can get from point A to point B, except for the parking. But now, with these connected services, trains connected to Uber, connected to a shuttle, I think in the next 5 years we're going to have a much more progress in alternatives to driving than we'll see actually in driving. And I think you're right to say, I think it's actually absolutely going to be a mayhem for a few years when you have different decision bases making the decisions. A computer makes the decision this way, human makes the decision this way. How compatible is that?
Right. Well, one thing you hear from Tesla or Google is that people get in these self-driving cars or on autopilot and almost immediately feel very comfortable handing over much of the responsibility of driving to their car. That's why you see all these videos on YouTube of Tesla owners doing lots of things they're not supposed to do behind the wheel in autopilot mode. Mark, how much do you think, and obviously there's a lot to be determined yet, but will 5G, do you think, address a lot of these questions? I mean, in terms of the latency and make the fully connected vehicles, or at least address the concerns that we can deploy fully connected autonomous vehicles in big numbers?
So I'm not sure that 5G is the dependency for autonomous vehicles or connecting more vehicles. I think anything that we need to do today with autonomous vehicles, for the most part, we should be able to do today for 4G. I think the bigger issue we get into is as we integrate more and more different types of transportation and more information and more consumer experiences into transportation, then we're going to be demanding more bandwidth, connect more devices. We're going to have much better coverage within these urban canyons and municipalities so that we really can control the devices or the vehicle at all times. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing most of the autonomous vehicles today that are being deployed are in predictive loop or closed loop types of environments within the campus environment. So it's going to be, I think, many years before we see it get out where the autonomous vehicles are interacting, with other vehicles. But I think 5G brings more bandwidth to deliver a better experience, but we can connect a lot of devices today, with 4G.
Yeah, well, from our standpoint, if you look at what's important, it's really not tracing every car every second. It's the inflection points. Right. How many cars at a macro level, a city, a DOT, an individual wants to manage their experience. So how many, at a macro level, how many cars are getting on the highway? How many are getting off the highway? How many have arrived in parking? How many have departed from parking? It's those points of inflection that change the macro story, and that's going to be the first chapter.
Well, Brian, how much can location services help address the congestion? We were talking before about how bad traffic is, really where all of us live. Is that part of the solution, do you think, to planners better managing the flows of traffic?
Yeah. Let me tie a couple things together that Mark and Syed said together. I think if you kind of look at technology evolution that we've been accustomed to, and take your PC, your phone, your watch, or a TV, like I have my old TV and then I go, okay, now there's an HD TV, I'll go buy an HD TV. Or there's a flat screen, I'll go buy a flat screen. Now there's 4K, I'll go buy a 4K. And I make that just as an individual choice. And I go, great, now this is great. And a lot of these technologies can be these little individual upgrades. And I think those are pretty straightforward and those are really clean. And on the location piece, that's a very clean thing of I'm gonna share my location with just you, or we're carpooling, but it's a closed group of people. Where you hit a really difficult part is where everybody has to do everything together, right? So now the fact that I upgraded my TV affects my neighbor next door. Right. And to get these ecosystems of a 1973 VW bus working with a new BMW, working with a new Tesla, working with a new autonomous car, all cooperating is a lot of work. And it's going to be a messy, messy situation from a technical standpoint, from an integration standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a public policy standpoint, of how do these guys interrupt. So I think it's going to be decades before you've got this vision of this streamlined, all the cars know exactly who's on which on-ramps and they're following each other closely. I think it's going to be very fast for the individual situations to go very clean. And I think the key, what Mark said, I actually don't think it's a technology problem much anymore. The technology is going to happen. People are smart. They know how to do these things. It's going to be an ease of use and a context and an integration piece that's going to be challenging.
Yeah, and not only that, we may even be changing the whole business model of owning a car.
Right. Yeah.
Because you can't have an autonomous clunker on the road. It doesn't work. It has to be maintained. And most people don't. So maybe we're better off renting a car, having them as fleet cars. You call them up when you need it. And by default, that will densify urbans. It will lead to less congestion, less parking needs because there are more cars rotating. Utilization degree will go from 10% to 90%. So we may see some consequences out of the autonomous car in this way.
Yeah,
and that will then also drive connectivity and bandwidth into that vehicle, because now you're not driving it, you may be working, you may be watching a movie, you're doing something else in that vehicle, and you want the same connectivity as you have at home, because that's how it's your living room on wheels, basically.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I don't want to judge, but most of us here are older, right? I would say the median age here is 40, pushing 50. If you talk to a 25-year-old programmer, tech person, their plans for how they use a car and what's successful is very successful, very hip, very with it kid in Seattle, where I'm from. Like a car is not a big deal to them. Kids aren't running off to get their driver's licenses. The options that we've got where I'm at in Seattle, you've got your public transportation, you've got trolleys, you've got Lyft, you've got Uber, you've got Car2Go with Mercedes, you got Reach Now with BMW, where I use it all the time, and I've got 2 cars. But you bring up your phone, you look, you see where every car is. There's several hundred BMWs, never more than a block away. You go, I feel like driving an i3, or I feel like driving a 3 Series or a Mini Cooper. You touch the button, you walk, it's reserved, you walk over your car, you hop in, you drive it, you park it, you hop out. That's a great lifestyle choice for this up-and-coming generation. And so just the concept of what it means to have a car, to own a car, and to get from A to B is fundamentally changing to the benefit of this ecosystem we're talking about, right? There's folks that's like, I'm not going to have a garage, I'm not going to have a parking space, I'm just going to have a Reach Now and an Uber, and that's going to solve 90% of the time of what I need to do.
Yeah, but I think what we're seeing, though, on that is that cars that actually are connected are generating data. But the vendors are not willing to share that data. There's a very proprietary view right now of saying, let me see if I can do it on my own. Let me see if I can get an advantage over the other manufacturers. Then you have the other factor, which is the 73 VW bus. So what we're seeing is that it really comes down to not the car vendors cooperating as much as the DOTs and the cities have to step up and say, it's not a lot of data. it's not about technology. It's just about a sensing. Say, what are the cheapest ways you can sense what's going on the highway? What's the average speed? What's the density? What's going on with parking? What's going on in the different thoroughfares? It's really about the DOTs. They're going to have to step up because they're the only ones that are going to say, I'm going to go ahead and instrument that whole corridor or that whole set of blocks in the downtown area to know what's going on with both moving cars and non-moving cars. So I think that's where the solution is going to come from.
To Brian's point, I think that that's exactly right. That younger people are now their first experiences outside of their parents driving them around is they get in an Uber, they get in a Lyft, and all the statistics show younger people are waiting longer to get driver's licenses. And car ownership among younger people has fallen significantly. And if you look at various Wall Street projections, that if autonomous cars are in significant numbers by 2030, the U.S. may be selling 1/3 fewer cars, about 5 million fewer a year, in part because these autonomous cars are not going to sit around 85 to 95% of the time. They're going to, circle the neighborhoods and work 18, 20 hours or however long a day, with the exception of maintenance. Mark, outside of big cities in the U.S., which has looked at that last mile problem with car sharing services, Uber and Lyft to some extent, Europe is clearly way ahead of the U.S. in terms of addressing the last mile in a more seamless way. What do you think policymakers need to do for the U.S. to do a better job of integrating those technology solutions, especially as more and more Americans are moving to big cities?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned a good thing when we talk about regulation, policy, governance. Most companies are not willing to commit big capital unless they know that there's going to be defined standards. And that's where we are today with a lot of the transportation technologies. And if you look at all the successful machine-to-machine or IoT implementations that have been deployed over the past 15 years, they all started really to take off when there was well-defined regulatory environment around it. So you saw the Energy Act of 1997, which defined the standards for the national grid framework, and you saw the big investor-owned utilities start to deploy AMI and AMR. You saw the Railroad Safety Act of 2005 define the standards for positive train control, and all the Class 1 freight carriers very quickly began to roll out, and they're still rolling out a lot of the positive train control monitoring capabilities. And now most recently, the Drug Safety Act defining how all the pharmaceutical companies need to deploy serialization and track the shipments of pharmaceutical drugs. And most currently, just this year, food safety regulation, which is defining the standards for things like cold chain. So you have this interoperability. And when we talk about transportation, we really are talking about interoperability. And in order to have interoperability, we need to have a regulatory framework that's sensible, that defines these standards. And in addition to the regulatory framework, I just want to mention that it still has to be about the service providers. And you talk about the millennials who may not be buying cars, who are using Uber and Lyft. What that generation has done is forced people to be great service providers. And we all know that great service providers are people who build services for me, and it's about me, and you anticipate my needs. And when we see integrated transportation and mobility as a service, it will start to anticipate my needs and really define how it wants to move me from point A to point B across this highly integrated, seamless, interoperable transportation system, which is tying back to the regulatory environment.
Yeah, one of the comment I was going to add is that I think some of the state and federal policy situations are trying to catch up. I'm going to use a simple example perhaps, but all of us who have gasoline cars pay tax on the gasoline that we get, and yet the electric cars don't pay any of that tax. And there have been a couple of states who have taken the initiative to say they're going to tax the electric vehicles based on the miles they drive rather than any gasoline they purchased, because they're using the roads, the same infrastructure that money goes towards trying to repair and keep up. I think those kinds of policy issues are going to crop up with some of these autonomous drivers. If the car is autonomous and is being shared by half a dozen different people, who owes the state? Who owes the road for that usage, if you will? How many miles did that individual drive? Should they be paying their corresponding share or not. I think these kinds of issues are going to be tough for many of the states and counties and federal level policymakers to try and solve.
You know, as we move toward more autonomous cars, more shared vehicles, are people going to feel comfortable, you know, using all these services we're talking about in shared vehicles, knowing that their data could be, you know, left on vehicles? I mean, just this week, the Federal Trade Commission issued guidance, you know, warning people that when they rent cars to make sure that they, you know, deactivated their phone and not left any data on the car. Do you see, you know, younger people or people in general being afraid of the data issue? I mean, as it is now, if anybody here is using Uber or Lyft or one of these car sharing services, chances are every trip you've ever taken is probably sitting on your phone. Oh, so Brian, you want to take a step?
I think
go ahead.
I think the tendency is for us to think that people are really concerned about all that stuff. And I think the policymakers and the legal elements will all have guidelines and policies and regulations. At the end of the day, pragmatically, I don't think it's going to be an actual real-life concern. It's to Mark's point of the context, is the benefit that I get as I share more information. Let's just take the transportation. If I let it know my calendar and it knows where I work and it knows where I'm headed, it knows when my kids' soccer games are, it can be so that I can hop in that car, it can immediately know that I'm going to pick up Johnny from soccer. It could share his location with Johnny so he knows when I'm getting there. It's going to know that I don't have dinner, or I have dinner plans later, which routes I need to take. And so I think we're going to share more and more and more information to provide this context, seamless integration that people want. So there'll be regulation and there'll be compliances and there'll be overhead, but the overwhelming mentality of both younger generations of privacy in general, I think pragmatically, is not going to be an issue, especially if at the end of the day the consumer's in control of what happens, right? So you'll let them be in control. They can delete stuff off the car. They can decide when they do and don't want to share the location, when they do and don't want to share the calendar, but they're going to do it when you give them that option. I think that's how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, what we're not seeing any risk or concern is the generational change. Exactly there. The younger folks just say, look, the convenience of just getting my stuff done, I want experiences. And I'm just getting it done, and if you know where I work and where I live and where I'm going later, and get me there faster, amen to that. Where we're seeing great concern about data is the cities. The cities are saying, are you tracking? If we actually push something out, smart traffic, smart parking, whatever it might be, are you tracking those people? Where is that data? Who owns that data? Where is that data going to go? So I'm not sure if this is a trailing thing that the young ones are saying, hey, this is where we're going, and cities are going to respond, or if cities are going to maintain their concern about that data ownership and those experiences. So we're tracking things we're tracking metal blobs. You know, so we don't care about identity per se. We want to direct people to open spaces. But still, there's a great amount of concern about any apps that are in the city and that are advocated by the city of what are the legal implications. Cities I think really are grappling with, how do I deal with this thing? The lawyers are actually saying, I've never done a data deal. I've never dealt with litigation around data. What kind of landmines are we heading into? So they're defaulting to be fairly conservative to avoid risk. But I think that will be mitigated or balanced with the actual consumer saying, I don't care. I just want to get my stuff done.
So David, you mentioned FTC, and I think Chairwoman Ramirez has been probably one of the biggest advocates of data privacy. And when we look at consumer data, you know, it's clear that the consumer is the person who owns their data. You know, the only people who can own data is whose data that it is. I think the issue that we're missing, even though that we have opt-in and opt-out and all different types of opportunities for people to understand that they're actually opting in to provide their data for a service, is we have to do a better job with informed consent. And we really have to question if consumers understand exactly what they're opting in for. So I think all of us, whenever we download a new application onto our phone and the screen comes up and the legal agreement comes up and you opt in, do we really understand what we're opting in for? And so I think that's where we have to do a little bit better job.
Right, how many people read that 50-page terms of service every time your iPhone gives you an update? All right, we've got some time for questions. I hope
All right. So don't be shy. Start thinking about your questions. We have industry leaders here on this panel, and we still have another 8 minutes that they can chat with us.
Great.
Thanks.
On the back.
I'm Ken Lundgren, Pivotal Communications. I had a question about the role of insurance, or the lack thereof. I was wondering if anybody can comment on that.
Sure, I can take that.
Exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, the insurance providers are helping. There have been a number of very well-known usage-based insurance systems that are helping out in this regard. And clearly that's going to be a trend in the future, not just in automobiles, but elsewhere as well. It allows people to allocate the actual insurance costs to the people who drive, and that trend may also be the kind of basis for decisions like the electric car manufacturers are going to face from the cities and states that tax based on the number of miles you drive rather than anything else. So I think that's a clear trend in the right direction that's going to help. It's certainly impacting the trucking industry in some ways as well, to help them manage the trucks that are no longer having as many accidents as they might have because of the new rules and regulations that technology is providing.
Yeah, every major insurance company has reached out to us because anything they can do, whether it's route or how fast you park, that all means less miles. It's less risk. So they're absolutely very engaged in reducing risks. And turns out I'm also probably not the greatest driver when I'm looking at metal signs, right? So there is a lot. If you know the right way to go and where to park and all those things, you're less miles, but more attention on the road.
Yeah, we deliver tons of different devices into user-based insurance and those kinds of applications, but it's fairly blind today. It's basically when do you drive, where do you drive, potentially, or how long you drive. But we still have a long ways to go. Is how do you drive? Is there actually some risk involved? How do you drive? I consider myself to be a fairly aggressive driver. I've never had any accident whatsoever, at all. They can't put that in their models. Right. When you do have an accident, you could use this information to dish out blame. You were going 69 in a 50 zone, or you were making a legal left turn, but we're not. Because I think that's one of those areas where people aren't willing to give up their privacy in that. It's too dangerous for most people to do that, even if it's perfectly possible to do. So we're still in the infancy of that insurance risk liability.
There are people opting in for user-based insurance, and they put the little dongle into their. But it's a small percentage. Small percentage.
And it's most basically how long do you drive and when do you drive?
Yeah.
It's not any deeper risk analysis than that, and never used to assert blame in an accident or anything.
Right.
Or worse, automatic ticketing when you speed.
Right.
It can be used for all kinds of things that we, as consumers, don't want.
Great. We obviously have the technology. We can prevent anybody from speeding ever. We have black boxes monitoring all our data, but obviously, neither the government nor Americans are willing to give up those rights. I think, was there a question in the back? Yeah.
Hi, Dan Holden with Comcast. My question's about, you said all the cars are going to be interconnected. What network is that going to be? Is that 802.11p? I mean, what kind of technology will it be? I assume it's not 5G.
Or DSRC.
DSRC probably.
Right. At least for the
V2V DSRC. Yeah, it's going to be high-speed networks. It won't be it's going to be DSRC or some equivalent thereof, whatever it evolves to in the near future, because the requirements that have been set for vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure are extremely, extremely difficult to meet with just about anything that's going to require the data to traverse more than a few miles at best. So you're going to need to have very high-speed communication.
Actually, it's going to be many networks cooperating, and it's going to be a transition over. Right now, we got DSRC 11p. We can use Wi-Fi, other types of technologies, and LTE for streaming in and out. But in the future releases of 3GPP 15, 16, there is vehicle-to-vehicle built into the LTE standards. So we may very well see a shift over to that, where they're addressing all of these concerns about speed and latency and all of those. And that's primarily where APAC is going. They're not going DSRC. So there's going to be many different technologies involved.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's going to depend on the specific need at the moment, if you will. Whether you use one technology or the other, it's not just the availability of a particular network.
We got time for a couple more questions.
Anybody else?
Oh, there's one over there. There's a couple, one in the front and one in the back.
as far as the older vehicles not having communication and stuff, why couldn't you come up with like a set-top box or whatever that was put there, and then it could also communicate with other vehicles?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So I
understood
can
the
talk a
question.
little bit about that. So, I mean, there are a lot of companies, like Delphi and others who are investing heavily, in those technologies, primarily with the OBD2 ports, in the vehicle. So not only the ability to monitor vehicle performance, but to give that vehicle connectivity to other networks, primarily Wi-Fi today. We're also seeing, 4G work, hand in hand with Wi-Fi to offer that type of experience. I think that it's just really a matter of how much information do we need to get from that vehicle that is given to us through the OBD2 port versus the CAN bus. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for vehicle safety and the autonomous vehicle by getting into the CAN bus, which is still fairly secure by the OEMs. Although we do see a lot of the universities and a lot of the big universities who are supporting centers for transportation transformation, who are beginning to integrate into those CAN buses without the OEMs. But there are some third-party products out there that are a little bit smaller than a set-top box, but definitely going down that path.
But Mark, aren't you seeing that the consumer value proposition of those dongles going into the OBD2 port has not really succeeded? There hasn't been a value proposition that works for the consumer saying, let me plug something into under my dash. Where they've had some success is actually the fleets. The fleet's making an enterprise decision to go buy 100 or 1,000 or whatever it is of these devices to monitor their fleets. That seems where there seems to be more success, I think, in retrofitting older vehicles.
Retrofitting is difficult because you don't have that integration. So if you have collision avoidance, what are you going to do? You can plug it in, there's another car, but you can't brake. You cannot control the car. So you can throw up a light, bus, but it's still the driver. So it's very limited for certain types of applications. For hotspots, for instance, yes. Insurance, one thing. Maintenance, those kinds of things. It's more suited to that. But anything higher than that, any higher functionality, you actually have to integrate it at the factory with the vehicle to gain much benefit from it.
One quick one right in the front.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but if you did have a specific question, I'm sure that these fine gentlemen would be willing to chat with you on the side of the stage, so just you can meet them over there, and maybe if there are those of you who are a little bit more shy that like the one-on-one chat, I bet they would do that as well. Please put your hands together for our panel.